Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be discussing my series, talk about the ones I've finished this year, talk about the ones that I've kept up with this year, and talk about the ones I've started in preparation for 2023. I will probably talk a little bit about this in my reading stats video, which will come in January, but I just wanted to make a separate video discussing series, what I've read, and what I have to read. So when I was making this video, I did notice that my Goodreads needed a little bit of updating. I have most of the series that I'm currently reading in its own separate shelf that says series that I'm currently reading, but there are some series that are in my completed series that have since added books to it that are now incomplete. But that's all to say that currently on my read series list, I have 98 series that I've completed technically. And then just for reference, this is a screenshot of the Goodreads series that I have DNF'd or have not continued. There's still a chance that I might finish some of these series or go back and work on them, but for the most part these are series that I'm not as interested in and I'm not currently reading, so these are not my main focus. So let's get into the series that I'm actually currently reading and the ones that I finished this year. So for finished series, one of the books I read this year was The Final Girl of Paper and Fire, which is Girls of Fate and Fury. So I read that final book and finished off the trilogy this year. This is a YA fantasy series all about a young woman who becomes a consort to the Demon King in this fantastical East Asian setting. She is taken as one of the Demon King's concubines. There's a whole group of girls that become these paper girls. They are full human girls to this demon, which is a creature hybrid human kind of being. There's a lot of trigger warnings for domestic abuse and rape. The Girls of Paper and Fire was a really good book in my opinion. Just the author had a story that she wanted to tell and she just told it really well. It has a sapphic romance and that romance was just really good in it. I loved the first book. The second and the third book were not great. It kind of fell into the typical kind of plot of a YA novel and it just didn't really work for me, and the world and the characters were never really expanded. It was always fighting off the same big bad villain and never going past into more. There were some new politics thrown in, but it was really just the same thing over and over again. It just felt very typical. I think it should have been a standalone first novel, and honestly that open ending, it would have been fine for me personally. So reading the third book this year, while it wasn't as bad as the second book in my opinion, I definitely read it as a way just to finish off the series. And yeah, and I did. I finished the series. The next series I read was the final book in the Wayfarer series. This is The Galaxy and the Ground Within. This is not my favorite in the series, but I still really enjoyed it. I love all of Becky Chambers' works. This is hope punk, soft sci-fi, and each book is its own thing with its own cast of characters. There are some overlap. We see some of the characters pop up here and again, but it's really each is its own story in this sci-fi world. In this one, we are dealing mostly with aliens, which is a really unique touch because normally we do have a human character to ground us, but it was all aliens. They are stuck on this stopping point, on this planet that has basically a gas station waypoint kind of vibe, and because of different planet climate stuff, all of the beings are trapped in this hotel kind of thing, motel kind of situation, rest stop situation, and it's just them dealing with each other, connecting with each other, and it was just really sweet. I really enjoyed this. I think I gave it a 4.5, 5 out of 5 stars. I just really love Becky Chambers' works. I hope she writes more in this series, but as of now it is concluded and I have finished off the 4-book series. Next series I read was the Exogenesis series by Octavia Butler, and this is a 3-book alien first encounter sci-fi adult novel series. There are 3 books. In my opinion, Dawn was the best book. It was the first encounter story. We really just dealt with the main character finding out about the world, finding out about the aliens, adjusting to all these different cultural things, and I thought the themes were just really strong in that novel. It's a very unsettling series, but I think it's just done really well. The second 2 books, which are the books that I read this year, are Adulthood Rights and Imago, and they are following different children of the main character from the first book. I enjoyed them. I think they talk about really interesting things. I think it would be a great series to discuss in a classroom classroom setting just because there's so much interesting stuff going on in the series, but I would say they were definitely less enjoyable than Dawn. Dawn just sticks in my mind really solidly. It's just a really, really fascinating series. But Dawn just really unsettled me in a really, not good way, but like it was really unsettling and it really made me think about things. And while I liked Imago and Adulthood Rites, definitely not as much as Dawn. But I read both of those books this year and I finished off the series. The next series I read was Bonds of Brass, which I read all 3 books in the series. So I started it and finished it in 2022. So Bonds of Brass, there's Bonds of Brass, which is the first novel, which I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. I thought there was a lot of really interesting setup. We have these characters, we have this angsty plot dynamic around them. There was just a lot of good setup in this first novel for a really interesting and fun space opera premise. I should point that out. Bonds of Brass is an adult sci-fi space opera story. And again, I loved the first book. I thought it had a lot of good setup, a lot of good character development, a lot of room for these characters to grow and change and learn. But the second and third book just didn't do it for me. The second book, we are stuck in a different character's head. I did not enjoy being in his head. He was basically a prisoner of war at this point, so it was just nothing was happening to him. He was just being really angsty. The major thing that really bothered me is that his harmful colonizing viewpoint is never overturned. Like, he has grown up as the prince of this evil empire, basically. And while it's set up in the beginning books that, yes, he's better than a lot of his, like, counterparts, he starts to go back into that colonizing thinking, and it's never overturned. He's never challenged. He never really grows. There is a little bit of growth, but it didn't work for me. I don't think it was well done. In the third book, when he was saying that now he was gonna fight for the Empire, it just wasn't convincing because he never really changed. So yes, I read the entire series, all 3 books. The first book, 4 out of 5 stars. Second book, 2 out of 5 stars. Third book, like 2.5, 3 out of 5 stars. The final book was slightly more enjoyable than the second book, but really not by much. I would not recommend this series. It just did not work for me. If you're looking for a spacey, rompy, just like plot-driven story, maybe you will like it. It's definitely a good transition book from YA to adult, but it didn't work for me, but I did end up starting and finishing the series at least. The next series I read was the Robot and Monk series. Monk and Robot, Robot and Monk. I think it's Monk and Robot series, which is also by Becky Chambers. This is a 2-book duology, and this is another sci-fi, utopian, eco-future. It's a 2-book series, 2-book novella series, so it's very easy to just finish it out really quickly. This series is about a monk who decides to be a tea service monk, which basically means that they go around to different villages in this society and like help people with their problems and listen to them. It's very relaxing, and just this journey of self-worth was just really excellent. I just really, really love this series. Definitely one of my new favorite things that I read. And yeah, I read both of these books this year, so I'm done with the series, but I would not be mad if Becky Chambers decides to write more in this series. The next series I read was the Bear and the Nightingale series, which is another series that I started and finished in 2022. So I read all 3 books. So I read The Bear and the Nightingale, The Girl in the Tower, and then Winter of the Witch. This is an Eastern European, Russian setting. I don't think it's a fantasy world. I think it's like a historical fantasy, like set in our world. I could be wrong though. It's definitely like inspired by like true historical events, but it's basically about this young girl who comes into her own power throughout the series and has like a deep connection with this otherworldly man who is like the spirit of winter, but also she has like this otherworldly connection with the like spirit realm of these like little goblins and demons and stuff, some of which are good, some of which are like cheeky or naughty. But yeah, it's a really interesting series. I really blew through it. The second book is really unsettling. There are definitely some, in the series as a whole, there's definitely some scenes that are just really difficult to read as they deal with rape, child bride situations, undressing a girl who is dressed as a man in front of people. Like there's definitely some unsettling stuff, but it's like doing it purposely. It's like talking about certain things. I really, really like this series. If I reread it, I might give the whole series 5 stars. There were just a lot of things that I really enjoyed. It just ticked off a lot of my boxes of being character driven, taking place over a long swath of time, showing a character growing into her own power from childhood into womanhood. And that final book especially was just really, really good. It was an excellent finale. I'm glad I read the series. Definitely would read more from this author. The next series I read is another series that I read all 3 books in, and that is the Foundry Side series. So I have Foundry Side, Shorefall, and then Lachlan's, which came out this year, which I read at the end of this year. So this series is a more plot-driven series, but it is another adult fantasy series, and it takes place in a Venetian medieval Florence type setting where there are these different like merchant houses who rule the city, and there is one girl who has some special abilities. In this world, there is a magic that you can basically imbue objects with different properties, make them do different things against the laws of like the universe, how the universe functions, and our main character Sanchia can do a little bit more with that power than most people can. And from there, the entire series just really blossoms and blooms into an entirely different thing. The first two books are set in this city, our main city, but the third book really matches the scale of the problem or the big bad of the series, and it really expanded outward. And I really loved that third book. It just, to me, it was definitely the best in the series. There were consequences. The characters were dealing with the consequences of actions from the other books. Characters died, not everybody's gonna make it out alive kind of situation, and just the internal struggles as well. It was just a really, really well done final book. And while the series as a whole remains good to me, like that final book really wraps it up to me that yes, this is actually a really good series. Maybe not like my favorite fantasy series of all time, but yes, it was really good. And then the next series that I finished this year was the Dreamer Trilogy, and this is the last series that I finished this year. So the Dreamer Trilogy is a spin-off of the Raven Boys following Ronan, who is a dreamer who can take things out of his dreams. Sorry, I just spoiled part of the Raven Boys, but it's fine. But yes, I love Ronan, so I really loved this series. It's a very slow character-focused, character-driven series, and a lot of people don't like it. It doesn't compare to the Raven Boys for me, but I still really enjoyed it, and I really enjoyed this final book. I don't know, I just had a really excellent time just poring over the character descriptions. I love how Maggie Stiefvater writes characters, and this book, seeing characters succeed, get what they want, it was really successful for me. So yes, I finished off that series and I really liked it. And the Raven series cycle is completely continued now. I don't think she's ever going to write any more books, which I'm kind of happy with. Like, I'm good. I'm happy with how everything ended. I don't need more. And then next, let's get into the series that I kept up with. So I kept up with the Every Heart a Doorway series, which is the Home for Wayward Children series, which is a series of novellas written by Shauna Maguire, which deal with kids that travel from portal worlds. There is a novella out every year, so I'm up to date now, but come January, there will be a new release. I believe this is going to be the 8th or 9th book in this series. So yes, caught up for now. I did read Where the Drowned Girls Go this year, but I have another book that I have to complete. The next series I kept up with was the Beyond Earth and Sky series, something like that. But this is Black Sun and Fevered Star. So this year I read Fevered Star, so I'm up to date with that series. And I'm not sure if there is a new release date for the third and I believe final book in this series. But this is another adult fantasy series, this time set in a pre-Columbia Americas. And I really enjoy it. It's a very politically driven, people traveling to the place to get to the action type series, but I do enjoy it. I like the characters. It's multiple perspectives, and I personally enjoy all the perspectives, and I'm excited to see where things go from here. The next series I kept up with was the Akata Witch series, which I read Akata Woman. I believe where this book ended off, there definitely seems like there will be another book in this series, but Nindia Okorafor does a lot of projects. She does a lot of different stuff, so I don't know when she will get to this. I like this series. It's a lot of fun. It's basically a secret world of witches, and it starts almost as a middle grade and goes more into YA with each book as the characters get older. So I really like this series, but I want like a big conclusion. I want like a big finale. I want to see where she takes and ends this series. She seems to leave every book open-ended to write more books if she so desires, but I want to see how the characters end up. I want to see like a big finale, especially Sunny like fully coming into her power because she's been learning throughout this entire series. I just want to see it culminate. So I don't know when the next book is coming out, but I'm intrigued. The next series I kept up with is the Locked Tomb series, which I read Nona the Ninth this year. Did I read Harrow the Ninth this year too? I believe I did. I read Gideon in December last year, so I think I read Harrow and Nona the Ninth this year. Really love this series. Really looking forward to the fourth and final book in this series. It's coming out in a year, and I cannot wait. I'm really excited. I love this series. It's an adult sci-fi / fantasy series. Really weird, but really, really good. And then another series I kept up to date with was Tracy Deon's YA fantasy series, The Legendborn Cycle. I don't know if this is going to be 3 books, 4 books, we will see, but I read Legendborn last year, and then I read Bloodmarked literally this year, at the end of this year. I finished it yesterday, I think. Again, this is not like my favorite YA series. It's okay. I enjoy it. I want to know what happens, but I've kept up to date with it at this point, so I want to keep up to date with it as I go forward. And so you might be saying, oh, that's great. You only have a couple series to stay on top of. No, because I started a new series. I started She Who Became the Sun series, which I believe it's going to be a duology. It is a Chinese-inspired fantasy novel where a young woman takes her brother's place, basically, to take over his fate. And I really liked it. It was really good. One of my standouts for the year. I don't know when the second book is being published, hopefully in 2023, and I hope it stays a duology. I don't know. I'm just a really big fan of short series, but we will see. Next, I have Darius the Great, which is a duology. It's a contemporary story, and it could be read as one book, but I do want to read the sequel. The first book was really dealing with Darius meeting his family, dealing with like the grief and his own depression. It's just like a coming of age story, him going to Iran, and it's just like a very, I wouldn't say soft, but it's just a very quiet story about a boy and his family. And the second book is going to be more romance based, which I'm excited and interested to see. I also started the Assassin's Apprentice series by Robin Hobb. So I have 2 books in that series, but I have a whole list now of Robin Hobb books to read. But I personally really enjoyed Assassin's Apprentice. It's a very slow, very nostalgic almost fantasy adult series following a young boy who is a bastard of one of the princes of his empire. Really fun to read, and I want to continue the series and continue with Robin Hobb. I'm really interested in her stuff. And then I read Iron Widow, which I am up to date with as only 1 book is out. Iron Widow, I don't know if it's set to be a duology or a longer series, but it is a YA sci-fi / fantasy series where a young woman basically sacrifices herself to be like a battery in a mech suit for these groups of warriors who battle in these mech suits. It's a really intriguing series. I liked the first book. I don't think it was entirely successful, but it was good, and I'm intrigued to see where the series goes. The Atlas 6 is another series I started this year. There is 1 more book out, The Atlas Paradox, and I think a 3rd and final book is coming out next year. So I've only read the first book, and I need to read The Atlas Paradox to stay on top of it. This is definitely a priority into next year because I already have that book. And then in the same lines, I read Winterkeep, which is a YA fantasy series. This is a new like spin-off. I wouldn't say spin-off, but it's Krishna Kishore is adding more books to the Graceling Realm series. I read Winterkeep this year, and Sea Sparrow also came out at the end of this year. So I did not keep on top of this series, but I do have it and I want to read the next book. Another series that I started this year was the All Out series, which is a series of queer contemporary anthologies for a YA reader. I haven't loved the series. There's been a couple good stories, but overall, I haven't loved the stories, to be honest, but I do like getting introduced to new queer authors. So I read the second book first, which is all contemporary stories set in our timeline, and then I read the first book, which is all historical queer stories. So I have the 3rd and final book, which came out this year, I believe, which is all futuristic stories. So 1 to read in that series. And then the final series that I started this year was Empress of Salt and Fortune. I'm not sure if it has a series name, it probably does, but this is another series of novellas, and I read the first and the second book, When the Tiger Comes Down the Mountain, this year, and a 3rd book came out this year. I haven't gotten it yet because I want them all in paperback since I only have the first 2 books in paperback. But yes, Empress of Salt and Fortune was such a good series, such a standout for this year, and so I want to continue to read this series and continue to stay on top of it. So as far as my mangas and comics, I will try and speed by this. I have Fence. I have 1 book in this series to read. I hope the series continues, but I need to reread the series to read this one. It's a sports contemporary story. I have Lore Olympus, which I've read as a webcomic, but I'm now collecting and reading them physically. Another volume came out this year, which I didn't read. I read the 2nd volume this year, and I believe I read the first one too this year, but I haven't read the 3rd one yet. And then I also have Witch Boy, which I read the first book of, and I have 2 more in the series to read. And as far as my manga, I have my standouts. I have Skippy, I have Yona. Those are the 2 series that I'm mostly collecting. A new series is coming out next year, which I'm very anticipating to collect, but we don't need to talk about that now. And then Haikyuu is going to be my back burner series, which I'm going to start reading. I've read the first 4, 5 volumes this year, 6 volumes. I will probably read more before the end of the year, but there are 45 volumes of Haikyuu to read. I read like the first 9-ish, or I will have read the first 9-ish by the end of the year, so a lot to go. And another contemporary young adult series which I read this year for the manga category is Welcome to the Ballroom. I'm completely up to date on that series now, so that is a back burner collect as it goes kind of series with Skip Beat and Yona, which is good. So my manga collecting is mainly going to be focused on Haikyuu this coming next year. But my manga reading will be focused next year on Kami-sama Kiss, which I bought this year. As far as other manga series, the other one I am collecting / reading is Descending Stories. I want to go back and possibly read this online, rewatch the anime, because so far the series has not held up to my expectations that I had when I was watching the series. So that one's on the back burner for now. But those were the series that I was reading this year and the ones I was collecting. Unfortunately, this is not the end of the list because there are 2 series that I have in my currently reading that I didn't read at all this year. And that would be The Legacy of Orisha, which is the Children of Blood and Bone series. The 3rd book has yet to come out. Who knows when it's going to come out? Hopefully eventually. I don't love this series. It's a very mid YA fantasy series to me. I do want to finish it out. I do want to read that 3rd and final book, hopefully, but I want to see the conclusion. I want to see what happens, especially because the ending to that 2nd book was real interesting. And the other series that I did not read any books from this year is the Earthsea series by Ursula K. Le Guin. This is, I believe, 3 books and then another 3 books, like a continuation, so it's like 6-book series. I just want to read more of Le Guin's work, but this is where I started. I thought this 3rd book was okay. I didn't love it, but I'm intrigued to read the rest of the series because people hold her fantasy so highly acclaimed. But yes, that's the only series that I didn't read at all this year that I could have read because it's all out. But yes, those are all the series I completed this year, all the series that I started, all the series that I kept up with. And then here is my chart of series that I'm currently reading and the ones I will need to keep up with in the next year as books are published. So honestly, it's not too bad. I feel like this happens every year. I finish the same amount of series that I start, so I'm always continually reading about 10 book series, non-manga book series. There are a couple series that I will definitely should be completing next year if the final books come out like they're supposed to. So the Locked Tomb series, that'll be one probably that I will want to read next year for sure. And then Fevered Star, of course. If that 3rd and final book comes out, then I will be completed with that. The Atlas 6, if the 3rd and final book again comes out next year, then I will be completed on that series. Darius the Great should be really easy to get that out of the way. And then the All Out series, I need to read that 3rd and final book, and I will complete that series. But yeah, I started a lot of new long-standing series, so we'll see how it goes. But if you want to know more about the books that I plan on reading for next year, definitely stay tuned. That video will be coming eventually. I like to save all of those end of the year videos for January because I personally have not finished reading until the 31st of the year. I've not finished reading, especially because I'm trying to read 100 books and I have to read 3 more. So I can make it. I need until the 31st to do so. But yes, those are all my series. Those are the ones I've kept up with. Those are the ones that I've been up to date with. But let me know, what series are you reading? What series do you hope to finish in the coming year? I would love to know. But thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys later and happy reading.